Joan of Arc Prime has made her way into Rise of Kingdoms, and we've seen her in action for several days. But just how good is she, and how can you get the most effectiveness out of her talents and skills? Well, stick around in this video to find out. What's up, everybody? Psychoed here with another Rise of Kingdoms video. Joan of Arc Prime has made her way into Rise of Kingdoms. We have, on our account, have expertised her. We've seen some other players expertise her. We've seen a lot of players already start to use her in the open field and even in rally situations. But this video is just all about how good is Joan of Arc Prime actually. How can you get the most effectiveness out of her in terms of her talents and her skills? And basically, how should you use Joan of Arc Prime? So this is everything that we've learned so far. And so I want to start with some of the general things that we've learned. One is that she seems to be very, very strong in the open field. So I've been using her in the open field. I've been using her mostly behind XY, but also a little bit behind Nevsky. Seems really, really strong in the open field. And she also seems to have some rally potential. I'll put a card at the top. We had one of the first ever rallies with Joan of Arc Prime, fully expertised, done in our kingdom, in Kingdom 254. Thanks again to Lazy Abo for immediately expertising this Joan of Arc Prime so we could actually test it in a pass rally, a live action, actual pass rally. Again, I'll put a card at the top for that video, and you can check that out after this one. I've also done a little bit of testing with her in a live stream. You can check out that live stream as well, where you can see us using Joan of Arc Prime in some ways. She has a really, really cool skill animation, so if you're into skill animations for whatever reason, you're really, really going to like her. But in terms of effectiveness, again, she seems to be doing a lot of damage and seems to be really strong. And a lot of people have asked questions about how exactly to skill Joan of Arc Prime up. And so I'm going to answer that question here. I think the first thing is obvious. Most legendary commanders, with maybe the exception of the Gatherers, you want to max the first skill first. So that's no exception here. You're going to want to go ahead and get this to level 5 right away. Sacred Banner is a super strong skill, 2000 damage factor, AoE. You give bonus to your nearby, and I talked about this in a live stream the other day. You give bonus to your allies, bonus damage for 3 seconds, which is actually pretty strong. And it's every time you use a skill. And as far as I can tell, there doesn't seem to be any cooldown on this, which means that when she uses her skill, like let's say she's the primary commander, she uses her skill, then there's a second of downtime. In that second of downtime, your other marches and the Joan of Arc Prime march is doing extra damage, has that damage boost. Then the next commander fires their skill. They're still continuing to do that damage boost. And for the next 2 seconds afterwards, you're going to continue to get the damage boost, possibly even for 3 seconds afterwards. I'll actually have to check the report to check on that. But the point is that damage boost actually lasts for a while. And of course, you get this rage restoration, which is just really, really strong. This first skill is really, really good. So you're going to want to max that skill first. Then this is the other one everybody's talking about, is the 4 skill, the Blessed. This actually triggers Sacred Banner again with a 100% probability if you get this max. There is a 10 seconds cooldown on this. Oh, by the way, there's a cool 10% health also thrown in here as well, which is really, really nice. But this is just a sick skill, right? You get to fire Sacred Banner again. Again, that 2000 damage factor, AoE, with all of these other stat boosts, right? With extra damage, a damage bonus, and also extra rage restoration. This skill is really good, and then when you combine it with this skill, it's just really, really so good. So what you want to do is treat Joan of Arc Prime like you would treat Tamiris. You want to go 5-1-1-5, lock in, go ahead and get a 5 on that first skill, and then open them all up and try to put your skills into that 4 skill, right? That's if you're slowly working on Joan of Arc Prime and you want to use her in some capacity. I really don't think she's usable. I wouldn't recommend using her until you had at least a 5 in the first skill and a 5 in that last skill. If you have 5 in those 2 skills, then I think you can actually start to use Joan of Arc Prime in the open field. I would say my estimate is that she reaches about 75% of her effectiveness at 5-1-1-5. So if you can get her to 5-1-1-5, you're working with pretty much a 75% effectiveness Joan of Arc Prime. I'm just ballparking this. I didn't do any calculations on that. But that's what it seems like to me. She's about 75% effective at that skill level. The next thing you want to do then, if you've got those two in good shape, you want to go ahead and start working on the second skill. This is all your stats, your big stat skill. You get an attack bonus. You get 20% march speed most of the time. If you're outside of Alliance territory, you're going to get that extra 10%, and then you're getting some normal attack damage bonus, which is pretty nice as well. And that's a constant normal attack damage bonus. So that's a normal attack, counterattack, 5%. This is just straight up adding stats and more damage to your Joan of Arc Prime, and of course adding that march speed, which is really, really nice. 5.5, 1.5. My estimate here is that she's about 90% effective there. And then finally, the third skill, this is the one that people aren't as crazy about. I mean, 5% damage is actually really strong, so that's pretty good. And then you're also getting this normal attack damage bonus, which does have a cooldown, so it's a little weird, and it's every time you use the skill. But the cooldown is only 5 seconds, so you're going to get this every skill cycle. You're going to be getting this cooldown. You're going to be getting this extra 30% normal attack damage, but it only lasts for 1 second. So basically, just lasts for one more turn. You get an extra 30% normal attack damage. Still pretty good. Adding some additional stats to her. But of course, once you've done that, you also get this expertise, which adds 5% counterattack damage, which is really good. And then you also get to do 5% more damage to troops that are actually like sort of extra healthy, right? They have more than 30% of their units remaining, right? And this is actually a really strong skill that I think people are underrating. It's really strong in Ark of Osiris, and if you don't know why, I'm actually not going to explain it here, but it's a really important to have that kind of ability in Ark of Osiris to take marches that are really strong down to a really low level and then not worry about them anymore. But in any case, the point is that this skill is actually pretty powerful for that game mode. And I think people who are serious about that game mode are going to have to expertise Joan of Arc. So in my estimation, you're at 5.115, you're at about 75% effectiveness. At 5.515, you're at about 90% effectiveness. And when you expertise her, obviously you're at 100% of her effectiveness. So that's the way to skill Joan of Arc up. That's the way to get the most value out of her on your way towards expertising. I do think you should expertise this commander. I don't think you should sit around and think, oh, no, she's good enough at 5.115. I'm just going to leave her there forever. I think kind of like Saladin, you might leave at 5.551. William, you could even consider leaving at 5.551 for a long time. I do think expertising William long-term is a good play. I think it's a good play to expertise Joan of Arc as soon as you reasonably can as well. Okay. So what else do we know about her so far? The other thing that we've seen in a lot of testing is she seems to be best as a secondary commander, and mostly to commanders like XY. And this is something we speculated about on this channel before Joan of Arc was even released into the game. We speculated that a commander like XY might make an excellent pair for Joan of Arc, and it seems to be bearing itself out in the open field. XY is just such a good commander because of the really low rage requirement, 900, and then he gets another 50 discount here on the 4 skill. So 850 rage requirement. You've got AoE, you've got defense reduction. You put XY as the primary. He does this AoE defense reduction and AoE damage, and then you fire off Joan of Arc skill followed by the second skill, right? You get the double skill. So it's 3 skills on the first cycle, and then on the second cycle you only get the 2 skills, but the third cycle you get them all again. So it's just a really, really powerful combination. The one thing I will say about this combination, and I've seen so far in field fights that I've done, is that it's very glass cannon-y. So there's really no defensive stats to speak of. I don't think XY has any defense at all, right? He's got some march speed, he's got some attack. So this is really all about damage. He does more cav damage bonus, he does more skill damage. Joan of Arc Prime has that little bit of health that we saw earlier, but with XY, you're not really getting any other defensive stats. So this thing puts out a ton of damage. It's I'm pretty sure it's the top damage per second march in the game, so it's really, really strong. But you might find some reports where you're getting totally surrounded, where you get a little beat up with this march. Of course, the other commander you can pair with Joan of Arc, again, with Joan of Arc being the secondary and Nevsky being the primary here, is Alexander Nevsky. Nevsky's obviously really strong with his first skill, single target, but huge damage factor. Again, a defense debuff just like XY, but again, to a single target. Tons of stats, a bunch more stats, even a big skill damage bonus, which is just crazy. Again, you saw that if you watched the rally video, you watched how much the skill damage bonus really beefs up that Joan of Arc skill damage, which is just really, really crazy, especially when you get to fire it twice. And then again, you get some more stats here on the last skill. And so this is also a really, really strong pairing. You get Nevsky with Joan of Arc. Really, really strong. So those are probably the 2 best pairs we've seen so far. You can try some other things, right? You can try Khan, you can try Saladin. But I think really those are the two best commander pairs. And again, even with Khan, you probably want Khan primary. Even with Saladin, you probably want Saladin primary. It's really hard to find places where you want Joan of Arc to be a primary commander. She seems to be really well suited as a secondary commander. Now, I've already taken her to level 60. Probably it would have made more sense to leave her at level 40, just like I've done with like William, and to not put any talents into her. But she's brand new. I wanted to test her. I wanted to see what kinds of things we could do with her. So I'm not that worried about the fact that I took her to level 60 and put all of that investment into the talents in that right now. But you might consider doing that. You might consider just using her as a secondary commander because she really does seem to be best suited as a secondary commander in the current meta. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean she can't be a primary commander. And I've had some people ask me, what would be the way to use her as a primary commander? And there's a few pairings that I think might make some sense if you wanted to use Joan of Arc as a primary commander. One of them I don't really know that I would recommend, but that would be Takeda. If you had a Takeda and for whatever reason you weren't running Attila Takeda or something like that, you could run Joan of Arc Prime with Takeda as a secondary. He has the mobility tree, which really just isn't that great. And so you're really saying, I'm going to take the support tree over the mobility tree. The problem is, I mean, you're not really getting any kind of skill damage kind of bonuses. You're getting obviously a lot of tankiness. You're getting some healing. There's some interesting combinations that can make things work a little bit with Takeda. So you can make that work. He's a flexible commander in that way, and you could use him with Joan of Arc Prime. Again, it's not my favorite pairing, but that would be one situation where you would use Joan of Arc Prime as a primary commander. A second commander where you might say, okay, I want to use Joan of Arc and as a primary, and who would, what kind of secondary commander would I use with that? And that would be the aforementioned William. William just really doesn't work at all as a primary commander. And so you could use Joan of Arc Prime with William. I feel like there's a little mis-synergy here because you get this extra rage from his skill, and you're also going to be getting extra rage from Joan of Arc's skill. And I don't know, I haven't actually done the math to where it's really over raging or anything like that, but it sort of feels a little strange to pair these two together because it feels like they both add the kind of support you would want in different marches. You wouldn't want to put them all in one march. You'd really want to separate those. That's why I think a lot of players are opting for XY with Joan and Nevsky with William. Or if you don't have Nevsky, maybe they're doing a Saladin with William. Or if you don't have XY, maybe you're doing Saladin Joan and you're doing Nevsky William, something like that. Because it really does feel like you want to break these up. It's really not the greatest pair in the world, but if you were going to pair these two together, I do think you want Joan of Arc to be the primary there. And the last commander that I think really might make sense to use Joan of Arc as a primary if you're pairing them together is Honda Tadakatsu. Honda Tadakatsu is one of the most flexible commanders in the game. He works with really any troop type. You don't have to use mixed troops with him. His secondary, when he's a secondary commander, his skill damage is still pretty good, and it's AoE, which I really like. Of course, he gives a lot of march speed, and he gives more stats and even more attack, right? So you're going to get a lot of damage. You get some tankiness here on his expertise. And you get some extra tankiness damage taken reduction, some extra damage factor. It actually slows the enemy march too, which is actually kind of cool as well. Keeping them nearby so you can hit them again with your skills. And some troop capacity and a little skill damage bonus, which again, because Joan of Arc is doing a lot of skill damage and it's AoE, this is actually a really pretty solid synergy. So among those commanders where I'm talking about using Joan of Arc as the primary and these commanders as secondary, I think the one that really only makes it a lot of sense is Honda Tadakatsu. So if you're going to run like XY with Nevsky, if you really like that pairing and prefer those two to stay together, you could run Joan of Arc as a primary and Honda Tadakatsu as a secondary commander. And in that case, you are going to need a talent tree. And that's what this really all comes down to. If you have Joan of Arc Prime, as a primary commander, what is the best talent tree to use? She has a talent tree that's much like Saladin, so you could consider looking at Saladin and saying, okay, well, how would I talent out Saladin? The difference is Saladin does have the conquering tree, and some people like to go in and get that reduced counterattack damage. I forget what the skill is called, but some people like to get that with Saladin, whereas with Joan of Arc Prime, you don't really have that option. You have the versatility tree, and there's not really great stuff there. So I'm going to show you 3 different talent trees that I think are all very usable for Joan of Arc Prime if you are going to use her as a primary commander. Again, I'm not using her as a primary commander. I don't really recommend doing it, but if you are going to use her as a primary commander, these would be the talent trees that I would go for. So here's the first one. And this is probably my favorite choice. This is the one that I would go with. And I think I just referred to this as, what do I call this? Like a tankier. And the reason it's a little bit tankier is mostly because of what it has right down here in that talent tree of the support tree. There's some tanky stats here. You get some defense, you get some health, and then you get this emergency protection here, which actually reduces, there's some chance of reducing the skill damage you take once you've already taken some skill damage. And of course, you get this loose formation, which reduces skill damage taken just across the board. So the support tree has a little bit of tankiness there. Over here, you get a little bit of march speed. Obviously, one of the reasons to go into the support tree is to get rejuvenate, so you can skill cycle a little bit faster. I've talked about this here before, and I've made some other videos about overraging, courtesy of John Wick and his discoveries. You don't want to put 3 points here unless it's really necessary, unless you're going beyond it, because that once you get to 150 rage, you're not gaining that 150 rage that you think you're getting. So then once you've filled that part out, you're really looking at just the cavalry tree. You do want to go ahead and max Undying Fury. I think it's really good to get Emblazoned Shield here because, again, you want to reduce that skill damage that you're taking. This skill is important because you're going to focus archers with this march, and it does a lot of damage to archers. I've done some testing where we saw that skill is actually really valuable. And then these you kind of have to get, right? You get some health here, and you're going to get a bunch of march speed over in this part of the tree. And then you're just kind of like, if you don't really want disarm, you can go over here and get Equestrian Excellence. You could grab some points and health down here. But I think really this is probably the best way to set up your Joan of Arc Prime if she's the primary commander. But there are a couple of other options, right? So if you're the kind of person who plays where you go in and attack, and then you break away and you get your report, right? You actually like break free from battle, and you'll get a little notification that says, the battle's ended or whatever, and you get a little report show up in your mail, and you like to then go back in and fight. This talent tree is actually probably better for that. So again, we're getting some of these defensive stats that we can pick up here in the support tree, but we're going all the way up to get Rallying Cry, and Rallying Cry is the one that really takes advantage of that, especially if you have a Hornet Fury. You've got some decent chance of firing off your skill early here before the first 10 seconds. And if you do that, then you can actually do a ton of damage with Rallying Cry, getting an extra 15% of all damage, especially on that skill that Joan of Arc has. So again, that's if she's the primary commander. So this one really works well if you're sort of going in and fighting, and then you're coming out, and then you're going in and fighting, you're coming out. This one is also one that makes sense with a commander like Attila Takeda, where you really don't care that much about firing off a skill. But Joan of Arc Prime, it can work here as well if that's the kind of fighting that you're doing. And then the last one I think is just kind of funny. I call it You Can't Run, because it's similar to the first one, except instead of getting points up here, we go over here and we get Cage of Thorns. This is a talent that I've really only ever used on Constantine in KVK2 when I was using him in the open field. And, it's actually really strong. Now, in those days, we were using Constantine, we were using Richard, we were using Saladin. So there was a lot of slow. I was even using Baibars. So there was a lot of slow in my marches. And it was amazing because enemy marches just couldn't get away. They were totally trapped. But Cage of Thorns is one of the reasons they would be so trapped, right? So after using an active skill, reduces the speed of nearby enemy troops, right, up to 5 targets by 25% for 3 seconds. Now, keep in mind that Joan of Arc, if she's the primary, will use her active skill. And then there's a second of downtime, and then the secondary commander will use their active skill. And then there's a second of downtime, and Sacred Banner will cast again, right? That's on the first skill cycle. So you're going to get 3 uses of this Cage of Thorns and really slow down your enemies quite a bit so they can't get away from you. So if you're tired of opponents running away from you in the open field, this is actually a pretty interesting build to go with. I think it's kind of funny because in general, you probably just want to get these more stats. You get some attack, you get some march speed yourself, you get some attack reduction from disarm, and then you get some health up here. So generally, I think you actually would prefer the other one. You're also wasting this point in rejuvenate for the reasons I talked about earlier. So I do think this build is really the best build. But those are the 3 builds that I think make the most sense for Joan of Arc Prime if you were going to use her as a primary commander. Other things to think about when it comes to gear, you pretty much want to go with the same kind of gear you would go for on any other cavalry commander, right? So if I'm looking at XY, here I've got a 4-piece, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces from the set, and I've got 2 other pieces that are sort of emphasized on health. There's other ways you can go about this. I think another way to set up your gear here would be to go get the KVK helm, get the KVK weapon, and then get a 4-piece cavalry set here as well, right? So you would be using the armband of the Hellish Wasteland, and you'd be using the tassets of the Hellish Wasteland. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that, but actually when you get the 4-piece set, you get that extra counterattack damage, which is pretty solid. I think that those are really the two sets you might want to think about going for in terms of gear with Joan of Arc Prime. But that's really it. That's all we've learned so far. She is a really, really strong commander. I'm not 100% sure where I would prioritize her in terms of commander order. Like, let's say you're just entering the season of Conquest and the cavalry wheel has landed right up in front of you. Who should you go for? I think right at this moment, I would recommend Nevsky as the first one you would get because he's just a little more flexible. You can use him with a lot of commanders. You can use him with XY. You can use him with William. You can use him with Joan. You can use him with YSG. I even made a video about how you can actually use him with Guan. But the point is that Nevsky gives you a lot of flexibility, and I think that he's probably the first one I would start to invest in. But I think you really do want to unlock them all. I would concentrate on getting Nevsky to 5115, Joan of Arc to 5115, XY to 5511. He's very playable at 5511. And of course, William at 5551 is also very, very playable. So those are the kinds of things you have to think about. I think it's a really difficult time for people who are coming into the Season of Conquest because the cavalry commanders pre-Season of Conquest really none of them are late game meta, so you really can't come in with much cavalry. You could have Saladin, but again, he's not really late game meta these days. And you get hit with the Wheel of Fortune, which has 4 late game meta cavalry commanders on it, and not really any in the Mightiest Governor. Of course, you could say, oh, well, I'm a garrison player, so I need Jadwiga. Okay, well, that makes sense. But for the most part, you don't really need to win the Mightiest Governor to get those late game open field cavalry commanders. They're all on the wheel, which is really, really cool, but it also makes it difficult to make some choices because you can't get everybody on the wheel every time, and it only comes around so often. So I think it's tough right now if you're just getting into the Season of Conquest, but I think Nevsky would be my primary choice, followed probably closely by Joan of Arc Prime because I just think she's so powerful and so good. Look, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment down below about what you think. Should Joan of Arc not be a primary? Should she only be a secondary? What commanders should you pair her with, or what commanders did I skip over that you want to know more about? Thanks so much for coming by, and I'll see you all in the next one.